Good morning, everyone. I'm here today with my good friend, Dr. Daina, and we are going to be chatting today about, we're going to be talking about Daina's area of expertise, which is helping women move through their day with ease and confidence so they can get back to doing more of what they love. So I'm super excited to be here and have Daina here to chat with us about tips and tricks that we can use in our everyday to support and reduce back pain, which is something that all of us are dealing with now that we're sitting more on our computers. So yeah, Daina, thanks for being here, and would love if you could tell us just a little bit more about your style of practice and yourself.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for having me here. So I'm Dr. Daina Patel. I'm a chiropractor and I have a focus on women's chronic pain in my practice. So I do a lot of work with women who have back pain and neck pain, especially when things relate to the spine. So my mission, as like you said, is to help people move through their day with ease and confidence. I don't want people to feel like they're aging, so to speak, because really pain is not something that should come with age. So I want to prevent that from happening as much as I can for anyone. And I like to incorporate basically a holistic approach within my practice. So I like to do a lot of movement. I like to do a lot of nutrition as well as lifestyle, because I truly believe that chronic pain needs to be addressed from all areas of life and not just focusing on one thing. And most practitioners usually just focus on the movement when it comes to pain, which is so important. I absolutely agree with that. But I think it's really important to not ignore all of the other pieces as well, because as a human being, we are one. We're not in compartments, and we can't just compartmentalize our treatment either. So that is the approach that I take, which is a little bit different from most chiropractors.
Awesome. I love it. I'm so in line with everything that you just said. And yes, love this idea of holistic chiropractic work, because again, you're so right. We need to think about the body and all these parts and all the pieces around the body as one, right? Because yeah, if we're not being preventative, then yeah, who knows what awaits us in our future. So I will, yeah, I've got a long list of questions here, so I'll just dive in and yeah, let's get chatting about how we can reduce pain. So Daina, can you tell us a little bit about what your approach is to helping people manage their chronic pain?
Yeah, so like I mentioned, I have those three pillars that I go through in terms of movement and nutrition and lifestyle. So I focus a lot on the different types of movement, as well as making sure that you're like getting general movement, just like walking, whether that's dancing, just moving your body physically. It doesn't have to be exercise in and of itself, but we also want to focus on joint mobility. So we want to make sure that our joints are actually moving through a full range of motion. And a lot of the times, even when we're physically active throughout our day, we are maybe like we have a physical job where we're doing a lot of lifting. So we're engaging in a lot of our muscles, and they're being activated throughout the day. But a lot of those movements are repetitive, and they're kind of the same types of movements that we do throughout the day. So what we want to do is we want to basically address the movement that we don't do throughout the day. So that's where some of the strengthening exercises can come in. That's where some of the mobility exercises, where we're adding that range of motion back into our joints so that they can move through a full range of motion, not just the range of motion that we are used to within our typical activities throughout the day. So that's what I like to do in terms of movement. And when it comes to nutrition, I have a more anti-inflammatory focus. So I'm plant-based myself. So for me, that involves plant-based foods and whole foods, especially whether you're eating meat or seafood or anything. Just focusing on like real foods is my main goal, and doing like more of an anti-inflammatory approach, because a lot of the time people who have chronic pain also have chronic inflammation within their body. So inflammation is what is going to increase your pain sensitivity. So you might not even have injuries. So there might not actually have been something that physically damaged your tissues or physically damaged any muscles or anything like that. But if we have inflammation, basically that sends these signals through our nerves to our brain to indicate that something something is going on. And that signal actually becomes amplified when there's any kind of inflammation in the area. So that's why I like to address the inflammation. And I do that not only through nutrition, but also with the lifestyle pieces and the movement. All of those things combined are going to help to reduce inflammation. And then we also want to incorporate things like we want to manage our stress, because stress is also something that can manifest physically. So we want to definitely not ignore something like that. We want to make sure that we are even our things like our mindset, we want to make sure that we are thinking more positively, because negative thoughts can actually affect inflammation as well. It's shown in research to increase inflammation in the body. So there is a correlation between that as well. So we want to we also want to focus on things like posture that can lead to sometimes more pain, but it's not necessarily the cause of pain. So it's not the most important thing, but it is something that we want to address. And we want to maybe look into things like supplements and other things that can also optimize our health when we've established that kind of baseline foundation. So those are most of the things that I work with, as well as sleep. That's something that's also really important, both from physically, like the posture that we have while we're sleeping, as well as even just getting a good night's sleep. Like everyone, people who don't really sleep well usually are associated with a lot more chronic pain as well. And that can be for many different reasons, but again, it can come down to that inflammation piece. People who don't sleep well may be more inflamed as well, and that can also cause more inflammation in the body. So I'm sure you speak a lot about this in your practice as well, so you're totally familiar with the things that I'm talking about. But we want to address basically all of the areas, and then we can look into other pieces. So I do very individualized care, of course. So if there are other things that come up and things that might be either causing more inflammation or maybe like just preventing healing, then we want to address that as well.
Awesome. It's very fascinating, isn't it? All these pieces that come into play to create our unique sort of experience of pain and inflammation. And I think you're right. I am totally aligned with everything that you're saying, but I think that sometimes we're not as in tune with this idea that, sometimes I feel like we are bailing out the boat before we've patched it, because we haven't addressed those pieces that you just talked about addressing, right? The sleep piece or the mindset piece or the diet piece. So thank you for pointing that out and highlighting that. And we'll kind of dive into some of those pieces in a little bit more detail, if that works for you. Next question I have here it's a specific question about movement, Daina. And it's, there's so many different types of movement that we can add into our routines. And I know you spoke a little bit about this. I think people end up getting confused, right? There's so much information out there and we're never really sure what's helpful versus hurtful. So could you speak to sort of, again, just highlighting these different types of movements and maybe what would be indicated when?
Yeah, absolutely. So in general, I would say movement is good for probably like 99% of people with pain. It's very rare to have some kind of condition that indicates that we don't want to move. So I know a lot of people get scared. They're like, oh, I'm in pain, I shouldn't move. Your go-to is kind of to rest and to stop moving because it kind of hurts and it makes the pain feel worse as you move. But sometimes that's actually really important because of so many different things. Like we want to get our lymphatic system moving. Our lymphatic system is where that can help to reduce inflammation once we get that circulation. And it's very similar to our circulatory system, which pumps our blood through our body, except our lymphatic system doesn't have the ability to pump itself. There's no heart that's kind of pumping our lymph. So we have to actually physically move to be able to get that flowing through our system. So from one aspect, any kind of movement is helpful in that case. And it can help to reduce any localized inflammation at the site of the pain. So sometimes moving the actual area that is painful is really helpful. But then we also want to look at strengthening our entire body. So a lot of our strength comes from our core. So that includes muscles like the abdominals, which most people associate with the core. But then we also have to focus on things like the back muscles, so important, and our diaphragm. That's actually a core muscle, which most people don't even realize. and our glutes. So that supports our entire like lower back and our pelvis. And we basically drive a lot of our physical movements through our core. So when that core is not strong, what we tend to do is we push some of that work that the core would do onto our extremities. So that way you might be like working your shoulders a little bit more, your knees or your hips, and then you start getting pain in those areas. So then it's not necessarily that the pain is coming from those other areas. It could be coming because we don't necessarily have that strength in our core. So we also want to address things like core strength, no matter where your pain is. So a lot of people think, oh, I have pain like in my knees, so I'm going to work my legs, and that's it, because they don't really focus on the rest of the body. But we have to address our entire body as a whole. So even if someone comes in with like neck pain, I'm going to still give them some core exercises, because a lot of neck pain can come from a weakened core, which, you know, it can put a lot more strain on joints like in our upper back, and that can lead to tightness and things in the neck. So it's all very related. So I never want to just focus on one area. And that's, I think, one of the biggest mistakes that people make. They just want to do the exercises for just the neck or just the back. And we want to address everything. So that's really important when it comes to movement. And then there's like things like stretches, and there's things like cardio, and there's things like exercises. So those are different types of movement, and they all do different things. So a lot of times people like to do stretches, and that's great. Those are amazing, but it's not necessarily going to cause any kind of physiological change in the muscle itself. So when you're stretching, like let's say you're just like stretching your neck, you just do like a quick neck stretch. That's going to help to loosen up some of the muscles, but it's very temporary. So it's not going to last. And then this is another thing that I find that people tend to do because it just feels good in the moment. And then they keep doing the stretches because you have to do them all the time. And then they're like, oh, it doesn't work because I still have pain. But we have to address some of the other things. Like we want to focus on joint movement and strengthening. So those are things where you're doing, I call them exercises, but it depends really on your terminology. I don't like to necessarily recommend workouts always, because some of us are too busy to do that. So when I say exercise, that could just mean like holding the plank. Like that is an exercise in and of itself. That's a strengthening exercise. It's going to help to work the entire body. It's a good core workout. So that's what I mean when it comes to exercise and strengthening. And then we also have like things like mobility. So that's when you're focusing a little bit more on the joints themselves to get them to move through their full range of motion, like I mentioned earlier. So that can be something like, you can do kind of like, let's say like a lunge. So you're doing a lunge where you're usually you just hold a lunge, but except if you're moving it, like if you're actually getting up and down, you're actually putting motion through that joint, maybe even holding it at end range. So you're like holding the lunge in like that low position, and maybe you're doing a few pulses here and there. So you're kind of getting a little bit more motion into those joints than you would have if you had just held the lunge by itself. So it's a different, like you're still getting kind of strength, and you're still doing like flexibility, and like you're doing a lot of these things at once, but the focus of the exercise is very different. So depending on the type of pain that you have or where it is, I would recommend different kinds of exercises.
Awesome. Could not agree more. I think it's interesting. We're all such creatures of habit, you know, when it comes to our diet or our lifestyle or the movement pieces that we're implementing. And I really think that, again, you've just highlighted the importance of really variety is the spice of life, right? So if we can get a little mixed bag of all those things, we're better off doing the mix than just the straight up high intensity this or the straight up yoga that. So again, we do tend to sort of opt for the same things over and over again, which again, as you pointed out, may sometimes be causing inflammation, right? Yeah, excellent. And then I know like one of the things that you probably come up against, because I come up against this a lot personally, but also in practice, is how do we find time for this, right? Like we know it's so important, But how are you advising your clients to incorporate movement into their day-to-day in a way that's user-friendly and that people will be compliant with?
Yeah, so I find a lot of people are kind of too busy to do their like 30-minute workouts. And I get that because I'm one of those people too. And I found it really difficult to just be like, yes, I'm going to schedule in a 30-minute workout every single day. And the truth is, we don't necessarily need to have it all within one. So it depends again on your goal. So there are other things that you can do, like maybe if your goal is like weight loss, like that might not necessarily work for you. But if your goal is to get rid of pain and include more movement throughout the day, you can break that up into very small segments and you can still get a very good result out of it. So if you, let's say you're taking the stairs versus the escalator or the elevator, that's a really good way to get in a few extra steps versus or even like parking your car further away, just like a couple minutes of extra walking. So I like to do things like that where you're just adding more movement in that way. But then you also can break down your exercises in and of themselves. So like, let's say you do a 30-minute yoga workout once a week, and you can take some of those poses that you do within yoga and do them within like a 5-minute period and split that out throughout the entire week. And I find that it's a lot easier to say yes to 5 minutes of doing some kind of exercise and saying like, it's a lot easier to just say, no, I'm too tired to do that 30-minute weekend, whatever workout you're doing. And that tends to push that workout kind of to the back of the mind because sometimes we're just too tired to do all of that in one chunk. So you can do like hold plank while you're watching TV. Like that's a good way to combine two different things at the same time. I like to do push-ups when I'm at the kitchen counter, like while I'm waiting for something to cook. Of course, be careful if you're trying this at home, but I just like to add things in throughout my day. If I'm resting, if I'm just like sitting on the floor, relaxing, I'll do a few cobra poses or something because we tend to be in a very flexed position all day, and cobra kind of puts our back into more of an extension. So it's just adding in movements that we don't necessarily do, but in very short periods of time. And I find that consistency, like doing this every day versus having your one workout throughout the week, actually provides a lot better results. So doesn't even matter what you're doing. Like you can do a 2-minute dance party and that's still incorporating movement within your day. But honestly, some is better than none. So any way that you enjoy movement is a good way to just kind of break it down into small chunks that are doable and don't seem too daunting. So we don't want to have them feel like it's just too much, because once it becomes this big task in our head, it's just really easy to say no.
Yes. Awesome. That's so great. Yeah. And I really think that, probably it comes down to a mindset piece too, right? That if we just said that we needed to make time for it, we would find the 5 minutes or the 8 minutes or whatever amount of time, just like we find time to brush our teeth a few times a day, and we're practicing preventative medicine for our teeth, such a superficial organ. So I'm sure that if we put our minds to it, we could find time to practice preventative medicine with our bodies, and just falling in love with that idea of moving our bodies. So yeah.
Yeah. Just make it something you love. That's a goal.
Yes, super important. And then I know that you have put together a list of your top 6 exercises and stretches, which I will share with the group if there's interest. But I was just wondering if you could speak to sort of your top exercises and stretches that you recommend to clients that have chronic pain.
Yeah. So like I mentioned before, we want to address the entire body. So a lot of these top 6 exercises and stretches I like to give are actually helpful for basically any kind of pain that you have. And sometimes the stretches in and of themselves, again, like I mentioned, they're very temporary relief. So you might feel good while you're doing them, but at the same time, they're doing some other things. So like you might be focusing on your breathing while you're doing these stretches, which is actually helpful for the entire body again. So it doesn't doesn't even matter where you're feeling the pain, but it's going to be helpful regardless. So I know this top 6 exercise list that I have is I've listed it as for back pain, but even if you have neck pain, even if you have like knee pain, even if you have hip pain, some of these are going to still be really helpful. So no matter what you are feeling, I do recommend going through them regardless. But you also want to do, like I said, the core strength is so important. So some of my exercises are just focusing on the core strength, which is going to help regardless of where your pain is. And it's listed as, this is a research statistic that I found, but about 40% of extremity pain, so that's like pain in the shoulders and the knees and the hips, wherever you're feeling it, actually comes from the spine. So again, we want to strengthen the entire body. We want to make our bodies resilient no matter where we are feeling the pain. And sometimes pain is referred, so it's not actually coming from where you feel it. So we do want to address the entire body. So I do a lot of core strengthening with my patients. I do a lot of overall stretches where you're just like, you kind of relax into these stretching poses, like child's pose. That's one of my favorite stretching poses. And you just kind of feel good because you can just sit there, you can breathe, and you can either distract yourself from the pain or focus on your breath so that you're not really thinking about the pain. And that in and of itself is like, it's kind of meditative as well. So you're bringing in a lot of other things within these exercises. And I always like to recommend that people be mindful of what they're doing. So I don't want you to just do an exercise because it's good for you. Like you're just like angry and you're like, oh, she told me to do this exercise because it's good for me, but I hate it. I want you to kind of find either like modifications that work better for you, because I want you to enjoy doing it. And it's also, again, coming back to that mindset piece, but also addressing kind of stress at the same time, because you're calming your body down. You're getting yourself from that very high strung sympathetic state down to the parasympathetic state so that you can actually start healing. And that's where a lot of inflammation actually stays, is because we're staying in that sympathetic fight or flight state all the time. So when we're doing some of these exercises, that's also another physical stress to our body. So we want to make sure that we are trying to relax at the same time.
Exactly. Yeah. Awesome. Thank you. Yes. So I am, so yeah, Daina has a downloadable resource called My Top 6 Exercises for Women with Back Pain. So I'm going to be sharing that with you, and would really encourage, like Daina said, that's for any kind of pain, right? We're going to reap benefits, not just for back pain. So I'm definitely going to be sharing that, and I encourage you to download it if you're looking for her specific, her specific exercises that she's recommending. And Daina, I was wondering as well if you could talk to us a little bit about posture in pain. I'm all of a sudden aware that I'm like sitting with my shoulders hunched. But yeah, if you could speak a little bit to posture and how that might relate to pain, I think that would be super helpful for us.
Yeah, so I find that this is kind of something that a lot of people just think that posture causes pain, but in fact, it doesn't actually cause our pain. It doesn't cause the issues that are causing our pain initially. So what I find is that it might actually exacerbate pain. So if you're already experiencing back pain and say you're sitting for long periods of time and you just kind of stay in that position for several hours, you're on your computer, maybe you're hunched, or like you start like slumping down and your neck is like looking down all day, you're putting extra strain on some of those muscles that might already be either weak or damaged, or there might be something already that's going on. So the posture will make things you'll just be more aware of it. So you'll feel the pain a little bit more, but it's not necessarily the cause of pain. So while posture and having good posture is important, we also want to address the reason why we're in that position, because a lot of people tend to slump down because their muscles that are holding them up are kind of weakened. So we want to strengthen those, because that could be the reason why we find sitting in this position and like just slumping actually feels more comfortable, because that's just, our muscles are tired. They can't keep us up anymore. They're working so hard. So it's good to address it from an exercise perspective as well. So posture is not necessarily the most important thing, but I do like to address it because that can give us some it just makes us more aware of kind of maybe where the areas that need to be worked on are. And one of the things that I see the most with posture is it might not even be the posture itself. I mean, there's always things that we can do to adjust, like our chair, our position of our screen in front of us, to our mouse, and making sure we have like an ergonomic keyboard and everything's all ergonomically set up for us. But at I think the root of it all is basically because we're not moving enough. We're just sitting for hours and hours on our computers doing our work, and we're busy and we're distracted and we're not really moving. So I think that's the main reason why people actually have pain when they're sitting for long periods of time, or really in any position for long periods of time. And the goal should be, at the very least, every hour you want to move. And it can be like a 30-second stretch. We just want to get our blood flowing. We just want to have some motion, some lubrication into our joints, which happens when we move. So at the very least every hour, but to be honest, every 15 to 20 minutes is ideal. So that would be my biggest tip when it comes to posture. And if you are interested in like learning more about how to set up your computer and how to sit properly in your chair and get all your joints lined up so that you're stacking your ear on top of your shoulder, on top of your hips, which is the best position, you can do my 5-day posture challenge, which is totally free, and you can learn a little bit more if you are interested. So it is helpful for reducing pain or maybe feeling more comfortable while we're sitting in these positions for long periods of time. But overall, I think it's more that we're just not moving enough.
Yeah. Awesome. Yes, I agree. And yeah, I did actually Daina's challenge for the posture challenge, and I learned some tips and tricks there. So yeah, I would also encourage you to check that out. But yeah, Daina, I want to be really super mindful of your time. I did have some other questions on here, but I feel like I'll maybe save those for next time and wrap this up. But any last minute things that you want to tell us about, or any like how can people reach you? I will share your links for the 6 exercises as well as the posture challenge. But anything else that you want to leave our audience with about pain or contacting you?
Yeah, absolutely. So I hang out a lot on Instagram, and you can find a few more resources there. I'm always talking about different things that you can do, giving people reminders. Even things like just drinking enough water is so important because our muscles are 70% water. So like simple things that we can do to kind of reduce our pain. And it doesn't necessarily need to be hard. It doesn't necessarily need to be life-changing things that we do. I think just doing small, different, like consistent things every single day, making really tiny changes, can make a huge difference. So even if that just means like doing 1 extra minute of movement the next day than you did yesterday, that can be really life-changing for most people. So it doesn't need to be, like I said, the 30-minute workouts at the end of the week that we make time for and then don't actually do. Just doing small, consistent things every day is, I think, the biggest thing that people should start to incorporate into their lives. And I also have a Facebook community, so I do put a lot more resources in there. If you want to learn more, you can join that, and I'm sure you can put the link up to that as well. And you can find my website. You can find the link to like book a consultation if you want to work with me and practice whatever it is that you want. You can find in any of those resources.
Amazing. Yes. And I love what you just said. I think that's such an important piece for all of us to remember. And I feel like you're kind of reiterating what I'm so used to telling people. But again, it's so good to hear it. Just that slow and steady wins the race, right? These small little things that seem insignificant. It's like, well, what did that plank do for me? Well, what did that, extra glass of water do for me? Well, these are not going to be things that are going to like give you these insane aha moments. Like, wow, if only I had known about plank earlier. But again, when we do things consistently, we know that we're going to reap the benefits over time. So thanks again for reminding us of that, Daina. And thanks so much for being here. And yeah, looking forward to doing this again at some point soon.
Amazing. Thanks so much for having me.
Okay, well, yeah, take care. Have an awesome weekend, and we'll talk soon.
All right, you too.